Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome to another exciting lecture with Dr. Ronald J. Brown. Our topic for today is the phenomenal and controversial career of Madame C.J. Walker. She was considered by many the first self-made African-American woman millionaire. Magnificent career. Our outline is a little bit of background of New York City African Americans, the creation of a new city, an African American city within New York City, which we call Harlem. But Harlem was more than just a place. The goal of Harlem in the late 1800s and early 1900s was the creation of a new Negro, one that had put the memory and trauma of slavery behind it and was going to recreate African Americans for the new century. And the role of Madame Walker in this, a rather phenomenal career, ending up in Harlem, her hair and skin care empire, which made her a millionaire, her role as an African-American activist, not just making money, but deeply involved in the African-American community, the early civil rights movement. And then finally, the controversy over what is beautiful. We all have our ideas of what is good looking, what is beautiful, what is a beautiful woman, what is a handsome man, but these are very much constructed by society. My father always had the expression that he liked what we called chunky women, whereas the younger boys in the family always preferred the skinny woman. Some people like big breasts, small breasts, blonde hair, brunette. Some women like men with mustaches or beards, tall men, strong men, intellectual men, whatever. You know, what is beautiful is a major question that is still with us today. And Madame Walker's career points out the importance of what is beautiful for African-American women. So let's get started. Well, the first African Americans were brought to New York City as slaves. We see the picture on the left. This is Dutch New Amsterdam. You see the wall going up and down on the right-hand side. Today, that's Wall Street. See the Herenstraat? That is today the Broadway. And you see there are still farms in there, houses around, but with farmland behind them. Well, the first African Americans were brought by the Dutch, not so much as slaves, meaning you remained a slave forever, but as indentured servants. They would be brought to New York. They would work for approximately 7 years, and then they were given their freedom. At the top, we see the slave market under the British. At the end of Wall Street, you would see where you'd have a ship would arrive filled with slaves from Africa, and they would be auctioned off at the slave market. Well, gradually, the slave population of New York started getting organized. Now, these were New York City slaves. These were not people growing cotton in what is today Central Park. They were urban slaves. They became blacksmiths, tailors, carpenters. They became seamstresses, tailors, shoemakers. These were urban slaves. So gradually they learned Dutch and then later English. And once they were free, following the abolition of slavery in New York in the very early 1800s, following the American Revolution, the slaves entered the mainstream of the American economy. And getting organized was an interesting challenge. For example, here we see James Varick, and you see from the name, originally Van Varick, which meant that he had been brought over by the Dutch and had a Dutch name. Born 1796, right after the American Revolution, and lived until 1821. Well, he was a Methodist, member of John Street Methodist Church, which still exists in Lower Manhattan. But he decided to establish a special branch of the Methodist Church for African Americans, and with himself as the preacher. And this became known as the AME Zion Church. It began as a Zion chapel within the Methodist Church, but then gradually broke away, featuring its African origins, remaining loyal to the Methodist teachings. But the Methodist Church was also, for many decades, considered part of the Episcopal Church, and adding the name Zion. Well, he became the first bishop. Now, bishop in a church, or even establishing an independent church, meant that the African Americans had to raise money to buy land. They had to train their pastors. This is not just one church, but they were sending out missionaries around the country, especially in the North at that time. They had to buy hymnals. They had to get an organ. They had to train leaders of the church. So it was really the churches of the African Americans where the location where African Americans became independent and autonomous. Another church was 1809. This is the Abyssinian Baptist Church. Here we see the church as it exists today in Harlem. These both churches, the AME Zion and Abyssinian, began in Lower Manhattan, where the people lived at the time. But by the late 1800s and early 1900s, African Americans were moving north. Now, this was a Baptist church which broke away from the white Baptist church, and as the name implies, it looked back to Africa. And Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia, was one of the very first Christian empires of the world. Under the emperors of Ethiopia, they became Christian. And I'm not sure whether it is Ethiopia or the Republic of Armenia and Georgia in the Caucasus that claimed to be the first Christian kingdom, where not just the people, but especially the rulers converted to Christianity. Adam Clayton Powell Sr. was the pastor until 1953, a very prominent civil rights worker. And like we're going to see, many of the people who moved to Harlem came from other states. And he was born in Virginia, moved to New York in 1908 to participate in what eventually became known as the Harlem Renaissance. Another African American who found her way to New York was Sojourner Truth, was the name she adopted as she became a speaker, speaking about the slave experience. She was born in 1797 and lived until 1883. But through her writings and her many speeches, she became a major fixture of the New York African American community. Henrietta Tubman, 1821 in Maryland, 1913. Again, a woman who spoke her mind on slavery and resisted slavery. Now, many of these people migrated to New York because with the creation of Central Park, as you can see in the picture at the bottom, the green area, a whole new neighborhood came into creation. And this was called Haarlem, named after a very tiny Dutch settlement named New Haarlem, or Haarlem, written with two A's, named after the town in Holland called Haarlem. Well, this area started emerging as a unique neighborhood. The Upper East Side is the area where the super rich live. And the Upper West Side with Columbia and other schools is where the intellectuals live. The northern part, after 110th Street, where Central Park ends, following the Civil War and the completion of Central Park, this area became a up-and-coming upper middle class white neighborhood. The bank president probably lived on the Upper East Side, but his vice president and receptionists and bank tellers aspired to buy a nice brownstone in Haarlem and become part of the rising upper middle class. Well, gradually, Haarlem began to attract more and more African Americans. Not just churches like AME Zion and Abyssinian Baptist and the African American Episcopal churches started moving to Haarlem, but Haarlem, by the early 1900s, began attracting more and more African Americans. W.E.B. Du Bois from Massachusetts migrated to Haarlem, bringing with him the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Haarlem was considered the African American Mecca, the African American utopia, attracting educated and talented African Americans, not just from New York itself, but from all across the country. The entertainer, singer, actor Paul Robeson migrated from New Jersey and lived in Haarlem, portraying Shakespeare. It was quite a scandal when he started performing Shakespeare for the very first time. To have a Black man interpreting Shakespeare was considered scandalous and considered just not right. But he stuck to his job. Immigrants from the Caribbean, Pierre Toussaint, arrived in New York. Of course, there was no Haarlem at the time, but he arrived as a slave to his master from Haiti and gradually became very successful as a barber, hairdresser, designer of clothing for wealthy women. Bought his freedom, bought the freedom of his niece and his girlfriend, and became one of the founders of the Catholic Church in New York. In fact, his body is in the crypt underneath St. Patrick's Cathedral that you see in the middle there. The only African American to be buried among all of the bishops and cardinals and dignitaries of the Catholic Church. Arturo Schomburg moved to Haarlem, and he founded the Schomburg Library, which we see in the picture in the middle. He was the son of a German businessman who had gone to Puerto Rico for business, and an African woman from Puerto Rico itself. But he was an intellectual, collector of artifacts of Africa, African American, all books and other things on African American history and even African history itself. He collected. And when he died, the whole collection became part of the Schomburg branch of the New York Public Library in Haarlem. Marcus Garvey migrated to Haarlem from Jamaica and founded his own organizations and proclaimed himself the provisional president of Africa, which in his mind meant any place where Africans lived, whether it was Jamaica or the other islands of the Caribbean, Central South America, New York, United States, and Africa itself. Very talented political leader. Father Divine arrived from Georgia, another Southerner who migrated north, and he had his own unique religious organization, the Peace Mission Movement. He was considered by many a madman. Many whites considered him a menace, but other African Americans considered him to be a messiah for the African Americans, once again attracted to Harlem. Conti Cullen from Baltimore, one of the poets and writers of the Harlem Renaissance, also one of the first African Americans to come out of the closet as a gay person at a time when this was not acceptable. Sweet Daddy Grace arrived from the Cape Verde, the Portuguese islands in the Atlantic. His name was de Graça. Well, in the United States, it became Grace, and he established the United House of Prayer for All People. There we see the Harlem Church on 125th Street. He was a great, charismatic, eccentric preacher, but yet invented a way of doing religion for African Americans, saying this is not your white man's church. This is an African American and an African way of doing religion. All of this culminated into the Harlem Renaissance, which is a time of jazz, of music, mass migration from the Deep South to the North, the Harlem Renaissance of writing, of dancing, of music, of entertainment, where Harlem became a city within a city, an African-American utopia in the northern part of Manhattan. Well, the Harlem Renaissance was more than music and dance. It was a way of liberating the African American from the slave past. The slogan of the Harlem Renaissance was the new Negro, picturing the new Negro, imagining modern Black identity, no longer the slave, but the creative, powerful person moving into the future. Alan Locke in the Harlem Renaissance became one of the leaders of the new Negro. The Negro proud of being Black, proud of the history of Africa, as Schomburg pointed out, as being a major component of this new emerging African identity. Books like African American Readings in History and Identity. Proud of Abyssinia of Ethiopia. Proud of the kingdoms of Mali, of the great medieval university city of Timbuktu, of the other civilizations of Africa. Marcus Garvey gave brilliant expression to this idea that it was time for Africans to reinterpret what it meant to be Black, arguing that a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. Schomburg, the book on the right, quest for his Black heritage, collecting everything and anything related to African Americans, and ending up with an entire library full of African culture. Marcus Garvey wanted to break away from white churches, and he set up his own African Orthodox Church, which was, as you can see from the picture on the right, largely Catholic in inspiration because he had been born Catholic in Jamaica. But here again established his own bishops, his own priests, building his own churches as a unique African form of Christianity. Gospel music marked this new form of Christianity. Here you see the Mahalia Jackson with songs like Highway to Heaven, I Can Put My Trust in Jesus, You'll Never Walk Alone. And this became part of the African American cultural experience, even bringing trumpets and drums into church. Now, many people said the drums and trumpets belong in sleazy bars and houses of prostitution, not in a church. But yet the devil's music was transformed into God's music in African American churches. No longer the old Christian organ droning in the background, but electric sound systems, trumpets, drums, music of a unique form of African American Christianity. Malcolm X, leader of the Nation of Islam. You see the message to the black man in America by Elijah Muhammad saying, reject Western Christianity, this white Jesus, and find a man of color, the Prophet Muhammad, and establish Islam as the new religion for African Americans, breaking with the forced conversion to Christianity that the slaves had to undergo, and even reject the names that the white people gave you. So Malcolm Little got rid of little and replaced it with an X until he had a religious experience and discovered that his ancient name in Africa had been Shabazz. And so we have Malcolm X becoming Malcolm Shabazz. I put in a little break there. So if you want to take a break, you can, before we start discovering the place of Madame C.J. Walker in this phenomenal Harlem Renaissance. She was born Sarah Breedlove in 1867 in Louisiana. So she was one of the many talented young people who made their way to Harlem. This is called the Great Migration, when millions of young people from the Deep South migrated north. She lived until 1919. And you see the book on the right, African American Biographies, Madame C.J. Walker, Self-Made Businesswoman. So she was for many and remains for many a role model for African American young girls. She was part of the 6 million young, predominantly young African Americans who fled the Deep South with its Jim Crow laws, racism, and segregation, and began migrating north in the early 1900s. Isabel Wilkerson's phenomenal book, The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration. This is when Harlem was filled with Southerners. Places like Cleveland, Chicago, cities along the Mississippi River, Pittsburgh, Boston, Philadelphia, attracted hundreds of thousands of African Americans who, in the case of Harlem, transformed Harlem into a city of African American utopian dreams. She is most famous for her hair and skin care products. During the late 1800s, personal hygiene was rudimentary at best. Most people, and especially poor people, like African Americans in the South, had to heat water on a stove burning wood if they wanted to take a bath. And underarm deodorants and all the sprays and soap and all of that was rather lacking for most people. And this was not just African Americans, but everybody else. I remember growing up as a child back in the early 50s, and we took a bath once a week. And it was considered not good to constantly be washing away the oils and the natural products on your skin. Well, Madame Walker, as a young girl, had severe dandruff and other scalp ailments, which she began to lose her hair. She had various skin disorders. Well, for most people back then, and especially African Americans with no insurance, if you went to a doctor, the doctor would charge a lot. And even the products that he recommended would probably be beyond the reach of the African person, both white and black. So they began to invent products to deal with these herbs and plant products, even animal products, to solve skin disorders, dandruff, and other scalp ailments. Of course, into all of this came the poor diet, illnesses, infrequent bathing. It was just simply a horrendous experience for most people. In fact, back then, most African American women would simply cover their hair with a scarf because it was so much work and expense to even take care of hair. Well, she started moving around from the Deep South. In 1905, found her in Denver. In 1908, she was in Pittsburgh. And she began developing hair and skin products. She opened a beauty parlor at one point for training hair culturists, meaning those women who were trained to deal with women's hair. She was also a firm believer in Black women's economic independence, very much influenced by people like Marcus Garvey and the Nation of Islam. She opened a system where she would develop hair products such as Wonderful Hair Grower, as you see on the right, price 50 cents. And she would hire young women to go house to house in the African American community selling her products. This was called the Walker system. So rather than in stores, they went from place to place. 1910 found her in Indianapolis, and this is the Madam Walker Manufacturing Company. We see the preparations, multi-preparations, which she had already developed by 1910. If you want beauty of complexion and loveliness of hair, try Madame C.J. Walker's world-renowned toilet preparations. So here again, aiming at the huge and growing African-American market. And by 1910, there were more and more African Americans finding themselves in northern cities, Or even if they got a rather second-rate job scrubbing floors or doing whatever they could to make a living, in the North, they were making more money than they could ever have dreamt of in the South. Well, they were not rich, but people started dressing well. They started wanting to take care of their hair. The Madame C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company. She adopted Madame because it sounded classy, and her husband had been a Walker, but she didn't stay very long with him, but she kept the name. Here we see the Walker Beauty School, the School of Beauty Culture, where she had her agents lined up, shows the graduating class of her beauty school. She eventually had 20,000 sales agents who were marketing her products in all the states, as well as Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Panama, and Costa Rica. She had a National Beauty Culturist and Benevolent Association of Madam C.J. Walker agents, meaning it was like an organization for her agents, and it was a benevolent culture where they had health care, insurance, and a very modern way of looking at employees. Here we see her Lila College in Indianapolis for teaching Madame C.J. Walker's method of growing hair. You see the advertisement on the right at the bottom. Madame Walker before and after her wonderful discovery. In the middle, you see her as her hair was natural. Well, when they say hair culturists, today we would call it hair straightening, or that word has sort of gone out, is now hair relaxing. But she discovered a formula which would straighten the hair, and that became one of her most important products. Back in the 1910s and 20s, these young dudes who were migrating from the rural South and getting some money in New York or Chicago or wherever, of course, when they went out to party on the weekends, they put a fortune into their fancy clothes. They also straightened their hair. The style was the conch. This was sometimes referred to as naturally kinky, meaning not very kinky, not very curly, but relaxed, straightener or relaxer. The product was called Congoline. And Malcolm X, in his autobiography, since he did that as well, he gives a phenomenal account of what it went through to relax his hair. Since there were very few products available, and Madame Walker was filling that need, most people still made their own products at home. It was a type of gel made from lye, which is a type of chemical acid, mixed with eggs and potatoes. And it was so caustic that you had to wear gloves to put it on your hair, and you had to remove it at just the right moment, or it would burn the scalp and you would end up bald with a burning head. And he describes this whole experience and describes it as a way that African American, both men and women, had to straighten their hair. Once again, the ideal of male and female beauty among African Americans in the 1920s was to have naturally kinky hair, relaxed hair. To have a natural afro, as we call it today, was considered barbaric. This is the style. You see the men and the women with naturally relaxed hair. And this was the need that Madame Walker was filling. There we see Josephine Baker. I always called her Josephine Baker because in France, where she lived most of her life, that's where it was. And you see the slicked down, relaxed hair, many different styles, but definitely not a natural born afro. And you see the emphasis on lightened skin. If you look at the picture on the right, you see that her face is much lighter than her neck because Madame Walker provided, we would call them skin whitening products, as well as hair straightening products. Well, she arrived in New York in 1913, and she was already a successful businesswoman. She moved into this double building at 108 and 110 West 136, which was the fashionable area for African Americans in Harlem. Further down around 125 and 110, these were the lower class poor African Americans from the South. So she moved into the upper class area. On the right, you see her driving her own car, which you can imagine was quite a shocking thing for most white people in New York to see. Even African Americans see the way they're dressed was really a woman who inspired a lot of people. Advertising blitz, alluring perfection. What again? Make this loveliness your own. Face powder, glossine, beauty shops, advertisements, a wise choice. And look at the hair. I mean, once again, lightening color of the face and straightening of the hair. You too may be a fascinating beauty, determining what is beautiful for African American women. Beauty preparations. See, Madame, free sample, tan off. It brightens sallow or dark skin. Here again, this was the code. It brightened. They wouldn't say it whitened. Hair and scalp preparation. It wasn't called skin whitening, nor was it called hair straightening. We see skin brightening products, skin brightener, another one, vegetable shampoo, tetar salve, and all of these were trademark registered, well packaged, marketed by her agents who would receive a huge box of these products, who would take them to beauty parlors, person to person, employed a lot of women. Eventually, she became so wealthy that she built her own mansion in Irvington, New York, 34-room mansion in the Italian style, which she named the Villa Lewaro. And here we see it as it looks today, with the back going down into magnificent gardens. Interestingly, she hired the first licensed Black architect in New York State, Werner Woodson Tandy, who we see on the left. Here again, she is very involved in the African American community, encouraging African American economic autonomy, which was the dream of African Americans, whether it was Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, economic autonomy. On the right, you see a big gathering of, looks like predominantly African American elite going up to her house where she reigned as the queen. Madame Walker beauty products are available until today. Once again, whipping my hair into health. You sort of wonder what she understood as whipping your hair into health. She was also more than just a millionaire. She was an activist. Here we see her with Booker T. Washington, one of the leading African-American intellectuals of the age, and people like W.E.B. Du Bois and others who she patronized. With her money, she was able to finance the publication of books, travel expenses, educational expenses for promising young African Americans. She firmly believed that the advancement of colored people, such as the NAACP, the key was economic development. Why go to white-owned stores and make them rich when African Americans can open their own restaurants, their own businesses, even their own banks? And this was a seminal idea advanced by Marcus Garvey and carried out by the Nation of Islam and Madame Walker. She was a major activist in the National Negro Business League, where she wrote, I am a woman who came from the cotton fields of the South. From there I was promoted to the wash tub. From there I was promoted to the cook kitchen. And from there I promoted myself into the business of manufacturing hair goods and products. I have built my own factory on my own ground. Shortly after she arrived, when she was planning to move her efforts to New York. Here again, the dream of African American economic independence. The National Association of Colored Women's Clubs became one of her major charities. Not so much charity, but activist involvement. A lot of independent organizations were being established. On the right, we see the famous Henry Street Settlement House, where wealthy German Jews were building training centers for the incoming Eastern European Jews, teaching women how to deal with the modern city, cleanliness, hygiene, access to medical care, entering the workforce and becoming financially independent. And so the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs became one of her areas of activity. A famous example of women's financial success in Harlem was Sylvia Woods, another Southerner migrated north at the height of the Harlem Renaissance and after. She just died recently, bringing with her soul food. Here we see Sylvia's in Harlem, the queen of soul food, which was not just a restaurant. It was a catering service. It had her own unique food products, which were licensed by her for a larger market. She provided scholarships for the Tuskegee, Alabama, today University, founded in 1881. We might remember the Tuskegee Airmen in World War II, pilots. Well, Tuskegee and Alabama School was one of her major activities, providing scholarships to promising young Black people, both men and women, as we can see from the picture. The YWCA, which was founded in 1905 in Harlem, this was a women's organization parallel to the YMCA, Young Women's Christian Association. Well, she started introducing beauty training programs into the many activities of the YWCA, saying that the YMCA is not just basketball and swimming pool and cheap housing, but it is also an educational center. Controversy. Well, inspiration for African-American business women? Yes, she was. Is she a role model for Black girls and women today? Well, many people say, on one hand, yes, she was successful at a time when even African-American men had problems. But yet, when we look at these pictures, and these are pictures the books published today and drawings, once again, look at the hair. Here again, it is conforming to the white ideal of what a woman should look like. Skin lightening to look like a white girl. Hair straightening to look like a white girl. Well, this was controversial. By the 1960s, the Black is Beautiful movement was all the rage. Look at the pictures on the right and in the middle. The afro was the way it should be. Don't lighten your skin, but be proud of your ebony-colored skin. Don't straighten your hair to convince people that you come from Sweden or something. You're a traitor to the blackness of your skin and the character of your hair. So many people considered Madame Walker, with her skin lightening and hair straightening products, as a traitor to the African people. Well, today this still remains a major issue. You see the advertisement on the right, and here it is, straightforward. Hair straightening. It's not just relaxing. It's not the conch where it is somewhat curly, but it is straight. Skin lightening soap for African Americans, where you too can look like a white girl. So this whole debate on what African American women should do, should they pretend to be white? Should they aspire to be white? Or should they proclaim their hair and their skin color as beauty itself? Well, the power of hair is more than just conforming to someone's idea of what is beautiful. Book by Piers Anthony, Hair Power. I haven't read the novel, but I love the title because hair is power. Go back to the Jewish Bible, the Christian Bible, the Quran. Peter says, do not adorn yourselves outwardly by braiding your hair or wearing gold ornaments or fine clothing. Your inner self should be your beauty. Here again, beauty is not the external, but the internal. And the fact that Peter says braiding your hair. Well, until today, hair is an issue. Muslim women cover their hair so that only their husbands will see it. At the bottom on the right and on the left, you see the Amish, Pennsylvania Dutch people, the women covering their hair. It is an adornment that only the husband should see. In the middle, you see the whole cult of wigs for Orthodox Jewish women. They follow the Old Testament and they shave their heads. but then they put on a wig, and it has to be a wig of human hair, not this artificial stuff. Although some women now sneak in an artificial wig now and then. But here again, the importance of hair. Above that, we see a Buddhist nun shaving her hair. Hair is beauty to attract men, and so it should be covered once you are married, and it should be reserved for your husband only. The picture at the bottom on the left is when I was in Paraguay. I ran into a group of old order Mennonites. These are very much like the Amish. Well, gradually, over the generations, they have sort of upgraded their style of dress, and they have added more and more colors. And then one day, the group in Paraguay decided that the women wanted to wear hats, not the little bonnets like you see on the right. And so the whole community voted that from now on, they could wear these big floppy hats with a blue ribbon. No red ribbons. The hat had to be the right color, and it would cover their hair. And their dresses, of course, below the knee, but with stockings. So hair power, the role of hair in modern society and in religious world is a very important element of religion, society, culture, and as we have just seen, a major question for the African American community. Well, that brings us to an end. There's me with my hair the way it used to look before I started getting older. It's amazing what kind of hair I once had. But at any rate, we have discussed the beauty myth. What is beautiful? And we saw from the African American experience that this was and still remains a major issue. If you want a hair experience, go to Harlem and go to 125th Street at 8th Avenue, which they call Little Africa. You will see hair braiding salons. You will see guys with all kinds of hairdo, sculpted hairdo. Sort of asked one of my students once how much she paid to have her hair done, because it was really very highly elegantly braided. And I calculated that she could probably put a child through college with the money she was spending on her hair. Here again, though, hair is part of beauty. What image do African American women have of themselves? How has it changed from covering your hair with a big hat or a scarf to celebrating your afro, or to straightening it, even dyeing it blonde? What each style communicates a message. Are you ashamed of being Black and having African hair? Do you conform to the white beauty model of straight hair that falls freely? And so the book by Naomi Wolf, The Beauty Myth, how images of beauty are used against women. And I mean, women have a major issue because they're so often accused of being fat, of not having the right nose, not having the right breasts, not having the right weight, not having the right teeth, not having the right hairstyle. I get up in the morning, I throw on a t-shirt and a sweatshirt and a pair of pants, and I'm done for the day. I'm ready for the day. Whereas, especially for women, they have to, as they say, put on their face, make themselves conform to the myth that they endorse. So Madame Walker is more than just an African-American millionaire who made it big and an inspiration, and correctly so, for women, but also a very controversial figure that is very much part of our culture. So on that point, this is Dr. Ronald Brown logging off. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you had an interesting experience, and I hope to see you in the future. So, thank you very much. Bye-bye.